The blood on Clara Vanderwick's Sunday dress told half the story, but the lie her husband had spun to the good people of Lordsburg, New Mexico, told something else entirely. She stood in the middle of Main Street on that scorching August afternoon in 1878, watching Reverend Marshall shake her husband's hand outside the church while townspeople whispered their sympathies about her supposed accident with the kitchen knife. Philip Vanderwick, banker and respected pillar of the community, had convinced everyone she was clumsy, fragile, a danger to herself. The truth was written in the bruises beneath her high collar and the fear that lived permanently in her chest. Xander Voss had been watching the Vanderwicks for 3 weeks now, ever since he had ridden into town looking for honest work after years of driving cattle from Texas to Kansas. At 32, he had seen enough of the world to recognize a woman living in terror, and Clara Vanderwick wore that terror like a second skin despite her careful smiles and gracious manners. He had taken a job at the livery stable, needing to settle somewhere after a decade of restless wandering, and Lordsburg seemed as good a place as any, until he noticed how Philip Vanderwick gripped his wife's arm too tightly outside the mercantile, how she flinched when he raised his voice about the cost of flour. Xander stood in the shadow of the stable now, curry brush forgotten in his hand as he watched Clara climb into the Vanderwick carriage alone. Philip had stayed behind to discuss business with Mayor Henderson, leaving his wife to drive herself home in the oppressive heat. The horses were skittish, dancing nervously in their traces, and Xander could see Clara's hands trembling as she gathered the reins. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, felt deliberate. He was moving before he fully decided to, crossing the dusty street with long strides. "Mrs. Vanderwick," he called out, touching the brim of his hat respectfully, "those horses look mighty unsettled. Mind if I check their tack before you head out?" Clara's green eyes widened with something between gratitude and fear. Up close, Xander could see the yellowing bruise along her jawline that she had tried to cover with powder, the way her shoulders hunched inward as if expecting a blow. "I would not want to trouble you, Mr. Voss." "No trouble at all, madam." He was already moving to the lead horse, running experienced hands over the harness. What he found made his jaw tighten with barely controlled rage. The belly band had been cut nearly through, just enough intact to look secure, but ready to snap under any real strain. If Clara had driven out of town at speed, the saddle would have slipped, and the horses would have bolted with her helpless in the carriage. "Mrs. Vanderwick, I need you to step down right now." The urgency in his voice must have communicated itself, because Clara obeyed immediately, gathering her skirts and climbing down with his assistance. Her hand in his was ice cold, despite the heat. "What is wrong?" Xander showed her the cut leather, watching her face go pale. "Someone meant for you to have an accident today. A bad one." "No," Clara whispered, but there was no real surprise in her voice, only a deep, weary resignation that broke something in Xander's chest. "He would not. Not like this. He's always so careful to make it look like my own foolishness." The admission hung between them like gunsmoke. Xander glanced back toward the church where Philip Vanderwick stood talking with the mayor, his expensive suit immaculate, his expression one of benevolent interest in civic affairs. "How long has he been hurting you?" Clara looked away, her throat working. "Since 3 months after we married. 2 years now." Her voice dropped to barely audible. "He is careful. Always careful, and everyone believes him because he is so respectable, so concerned about his clumsy wife who has so many unfortunate accidents." Xander had faced down rustlers and card cheats, had stared into the business end of more than one gun, but he had never felt rage quite like this. It was cold and focused, settling into his bones like certainty. "Does he know you have figured out his lies?" "I think he suspects I am not as foolish as I pretend to be." Clara's hands twisted in her skirts. "But what can I do? He owns the bank. The sheriff is his friend. Judge Taylor plays poker with him every Saturday. If I speak against him, who would believe me? I have no family, no money of my own, nowhere to go." The trap she described was all too common, Xander knew. Women had few rights, fewer options, and society conspired to keep them locked in place, even when that place was killing them. But he had not spent the last decade living by his own code, refusing to bow to corrupt ranchers and crooked lawmen, only to stand by and watch an innocent woman be murdered by a man who hid behind respectability. "I believe you," he said quietly, and watched Clara's eyes fill with tears. "And I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows the truth." "You cannot." Clara gripped his arm with surprising strength. "He will ruin you, or worse. Philip is not just careful with how he hurts me. He is careful about protecting himself. Men who cross him have lost their businesses, their reputations. Some have simply disappeared." Xander covered her hand with his own, the touch gentle but firm. "Mrs. Vanderwick, I have been shot at, snake-bit, caught in stampedes and flash floods. I have survived everything the West could throw at me because I am too stubborn to die and too mean to quit. Your husband does not scare me." For the first time, something like hope flickered across Clara's face before fear smothered it again. "Even if people believed you, what then? I am his wife, his property in the eyes of the law. There is no escape for me. Then we will make one." The words came out with more conviction than Xander had felt about anything in years. He had drifted for so long, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. But looking at Clara Vanderwick with her bruised face and shaking hands, something in him settled and took root. This mattered. She mattered. Footsteps approached and Clara jerked her hand back, putting proper distance between them. Philip Vanderwick rounded the corner of the Mercantile with Mayor Henderson, his expression pleasant until he saw his wife standing beside Xander near the damaged carriage. "Clara, my dear, what is the delay?" Philip's voice was smooth as silk, but Xander saw the flash of anger in his eyes as they fixed on his wife. "Surely you are capable of managing the horses for a simple drive home." "There is a problem with the tack, Mr. Vanderwick," Xander said evenly, stepping slightly between Philip and Clara. "The belly band was cut. If Mrs. Vanderwick had driven off, the horses would have bolted for certain." Philip's face arranged itself into an expression of shock and concern so perfectly practiced that Xander might have believed it if he had not seen Clara's reaction. "Cut? Why, that is terrible. Clara, you might have been killed." He moved forward to take his wife's arm, fingers digging in hard enough to make her wince. "How fortunate that Mr. Voss happened to notice. Though I must say, the stable hands should be more careful when they prepare our carriage. I will have to speak to the owner about their negligence." "The carriage was not prepared at the stable," Xander said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel entering it. "I watched you hitch the horses yourself this morning before church, Mr. Vanderwick. Watched you take your time with it too, being very particular about the arrangement." The mask slipped for just a moment, and Xander saw the cold calculation in Philip Vanderwick's eyes. Here was a man who had been playing a dangerous game for years and had nearly been caught. "I am certain I did no such thing. You must be mistaken." "I am not mistaken." Xander held the banker's gaze steadily. "I have an excellent memory for details, especially when something does not sit right with me." Mayor Henderson cleared his throat uncomfortably, looking between the two men. "Now, let us not jump to conclusions. Perhaps the leather was simply old and frayed. These things happen." "The cut was clean and fresh," Xander said flatly, "and it was on the underside where Mrs. Vanderwick would not have noticed when she climbed up." Philip's grip on Clara's arm tightened further, and she made a small sound of pain. Xander's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he held his ground, knowing that throwing a punch at the town's most prominent banker in front of the mayor would only make things worse for Clara. "This is absurd," Philip said, his voice hardening. "Are you suggesting I would sabotage my own carriage and endanger my beloved wife? What possible reason could I have?" "That's an excellent question," Xander said softly. "Maybe the same reason Mrs. Vanderwick has so many unfortunate accidents, the kind that leave bruises shaped like fingerprints." Clara gasped, and Mayor Henderson looked genuinely shocked, but Philip simply smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Mr. Voss, you are new to Lordsburg, so perhaps you do not understand how things work here. My wife is indeed accident-prone, a fact that causes me great distress. She bruises easily. She is nervous around kitchen implements. She trips on her own skirts. It is embarrassing for her, I know, and painful for me to watch. But I would never do anything to harm her." The lie was delivered with such smooth confidence that Xander could see Mayor Henderson's initial shock fading into uncertainty. This was how Philip had managed it for so long, Xander realized. He told his lies with absolute conviction, backed by his reputation and standing in the community, and made anyone who questioned him seem unreasonable. "Is that true, Mrs. Vanderwick?" Mayor Henderson asked, not unkindly. "Has your husband ever raised a hand to you?" Clara opened her mouth, and Xander could see the war playing out behind her eyes. She could tell the truth right now, in front of a witness, but what would happen after? Philip would deny it, others would take his word over hers, and then she would be alone with him again with no protection at all. "I am very clumsy," Clara said finally, her voice hollow. "My husband has been nothing but patient with me." Philip's smile widened in triumph. "You see? Now, Mr. Voss, I appreciate your concern for my wife's safety, but I will thank you not to spread malicious rumors about our marriage. I would hate to have to speak to your employer about your inappropriate interest in other men's wives." The threat was clear and casually delivered. Xander could lose his job, his reputation, be driven out of town as a troublemaker while Clara remained trapped with a man who was slowly killing her. It was a neat trap, and Philip Vanderwick clearly had years of practice in springing it. But Xander had not been bluffing when he said he was too stubborn to die and too mean to quit. "I will repair the tack," he said evenly, "and I will be watching, Mr. Vanderwick. If anything else happens to your wife, any more unfortunate accidents, I will notice, and I will make sure others notice too." "How noble," Philip said dryly. "Come, Clara, we have wasted enough time with this nonsense." Xander watched them walk away, Philip's hand clamped on Clara's arm like a manacle, and began planning. If direct accusations would not work, he would need evidence, witnesses, a way to make Philip Vanderwick's lies impossible to maintain. It would take time and patience, but Xander had both. What he had not expected was the way Clara had looked at him in that moment before her husband dragged her away. It was more than gratitude or hope. It was recognition, as if she had seen in him something she had been searching for. The memory of her cold hand in his stayed with Xander as he repaired the carriage tack, as he returned to the stable, as he lay in his narrow bunk that night staring at the ceiling. He had felt something shift in that moment too, something he had not experienced in all his years of drifting. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Xander wanted to stay somewhere, to fight for something beyond his own survival. He wanted to tear down Philip Vanderwick's carefully constructed lies and make sure Clara was safe. And if he was honest with himself in the darkness of his room, he wanted more than that. He wanted to see her smile without fear. He wanted to hear her laugh freely. He wanted to know who she really was beneath the shell of terror her husband had built around her. It was too soon for such thoughts, too complicated given her circumstances, but Xander had never been good at denying the truth. He was drawn to Clara Vanderwick like iron to a lodestone, and he suspected she felt the same pull. It should have made him cautious, should have made him step back before things got even more tangled. Instead, it only strengthened his resolve. The next morning, Xander began asking careful questions around town. He helped old Mrs. Patterson load her purchases from the mercantile and learned that Clara had once been a schoolteacher, bright and ambitious, before Philip had swept her off her feet with promises of a comfortable life. He shared coffee with the blacksmith and heard about the time Clara had appeared with a broken wrist that Philip claimed came from a fall down the stairs, even though the Vanderwick house was a single story. He played cards with the men who gathered at the saloon and listened to them discuss how unfortunate it was that such a pretty young woman was so fragile and nervous all the time. The picture that emerged was damning. Philip Vanderwick had been systematically breaking his wife down, isolating her, convincing everyone that she was the problem while he played the role of the patient, long-suffering husband. And it had worked beautifully, because Philip was charming, wealthy, and had been careful never to let his mask slip in public. But every careful man made mistakes eventually, and Xander was determined to be watching when Philip made his. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days after the incident with the carriage, Xander was making a delivery of feed to the Vanderwick property. Their house sat on the edge of town, a substantial structure with a wide porch and carefully tended garden. Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when Xander arrived, and he could see fresh bruises on her arms where her sleeves had ridden up. She looked up at the sound of his wagon, and for a moment her whole face transformed with something too complicated to name. Then she caught herself, glancing nervously toward the house, and the shutters came back down. "Mrs. Vanderwick," Xander greeted her, climbing down from the wagon. "Delivery of feed for your horses. Where would you like me to put it?" "The barn, please." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. My husband is at the bank. He should return around noon. The information was deliberate, Xander knew. She was telling him they had time to talk privately. He unloaded the heavy sacks, carrying them to the small barn behind the house, while Clara followed at a careful distance. Once they were out of sight of the road, she spoke again. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did the other day, and to apologize for lying in front of the mayor. You do not need to apologize, Xander said, stacking the feed bags carefully. You were protecting yourself the only way you could. I hate it. The words burst from Clara with surprising vehemence. I hate lying. I hate pretending. I hate being afraid every moment of every day. I used to be strong. I used to believe I could do anything. And then I married Philip, and slowly, so slowly, I barely noticed it happening. He took everything away from me. My confidence, my friends, my sense of self. Now I do not even recognize the woman I have become. Xander turned to face her fully, seeing the fire burning beneath her fear. This was the real Clara, he realized, the one Philip had tried so hard to extinguish. That woman is still in there. She is still fighting. Is she? Clara laughed bitterly. Because from where I stand, she looks like a coward who cannot even speak the truth when given the chance. You are not a coward. Xander took a step closer, then stopped, not wanting to crowd her. You are surviving impossible circumstances. There is no shame in that. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You do not understand what it is like. Everyone thinks he's wonderful, kind, generous, respectable Philip Vanderwick, who married the odd schoolteacher and tried to make something of her. They think I am lucky to have him, and maybe I am crazy. Maybe I am the problem, and he is just trying to help me. You are not crazy. Xander's voice was firm. And you are not the problem. Clara, I have known men like your husband. They are very good at making their victims doubt reality, at twisting everything until you cannot trust your own mind. But I know what I saw in that carriage. I know what I see when I look at you. He is hurting you, and he has convinced everyone it is your fault. That is not love. That is not help. That is evil, dressed up in a fancy suit. The use of her first name seemed to break something open in Clara. A sob escaped her throat, and she covered her face with her hands. I do not know what to do. I have thought about running, but I have no money. He controls everything. And even if I could leave, where would I go? What would I do? I have no family, no references since he isolated me from everyone who knew me before. I am trapped. Xander closed the distance between them, and this time when he pulled her into his arms, she did not resist. She collapsed against his chest, shaking with silent sobs, and he held her gently, one hand stroking her hair while he murmured reassurances. She smelled like lavender and lye soap, and he could feel how thin she had become beneath her dress, how her whole body trembled with exhaustion and fear. You are not trapped, he said quietly. I am going to help you. We are going to expose him for what he really is, and then you will be free. Clara pulled back to look up at him, and Xander was struck again by how beautiful she was, despite everything Philip had done to her. At 24, she should have been in the bloom of youth, but suffering had carved shadows under her eyes and lines of worry around her mouth. Still, when she looked at him like this, with desperate hope and something deeper flickering in her green gaze, his heart stuttered in his chest. Why are you doing this? She asked. You do not know me. You owe me nothing. Why risk yourself for a stranger? Xander could have given her a dozen practical reasons, could have talked about justice and doing the right thing. Instead, he told her the truth. Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you mattered, and I am tired of drifting past people who matter without ever stopping to actually make a difference. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that went beyond the immediate crisis. Clara's hand came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart, and Xander covered it with his own. They stood like that for a long moment, and he could see her struggling with feelings that were complicated and probably frightening given her circumstances. I should not feel this way, she whispered. I am married. It is wrong. Your marriage is a cage, not a sacrament. Xander spoke carefully, knowing this was dangerous ground. But I'm not asking anything of you, Clara. I'm just trying to help you get free. What happens after that is up to you. And if I wanted something to happen after? The question was barely audible, but it hit Xander like a lightning strike. If I have spent the last 3 days thinking about a man who is not my husband, about the way he looked at me like I was worth saving, about how his voice sounds when he says my name. Xander's thumb stroked across her knuckles, his own heart hammering. Then I would say I have spent the last 3 days thinking about you too. About your courage and strength, about the life you deserve to have, about whether you might want to build that life with someone who would never hurt you. Clara's breath caught. Xander. The sound of his name on her lips felt like a gift and a promise. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his whole body ached with it, but he held himself still. She was vulnerable right now, traumatized and desperate, and he would not take advantage of that no matter how much he wanted her. We should not, Clara said, but she was leaning into him, her face tilting up toward his. No, Xander agreed roughly. We definitely should not. But when she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, he was lost. The kiss was gentle and desperate all at once, her hands fisting in his shirt while he cradled her face like something precious and breakable. She tasted like tears and hope, and Xander felt something in his chest crack wide open. They broke apart gasping, and Clara's eyes were wide with wonder and fear. I've never been kissed like that, like I was something treasured. The words broke Xander's heart and fueled his determination in equal measure. You are treasured, and I'm going to make sure you never forget it again. A sound from the direction of the house made them both freeze. Clara went pale, listening intently, but it was only the wind banging a loose shutter. Still, the moment was broken, reality crashing back in. You need to go, Clara said urgently. If Philip comes home and finds you here, finds us like this, he will kill you. And then he will kill me for the betrayal. I'm not afraid of him. Well, I am. Clara pushed at his chest, her fear reigniting. Please, Xander. I cannot bear it if something happened to you because of me. Xander let her push him toward the barn door, but he caught her hand one more time. I'm going to come back tomorrow evening. Philip has a town council meeting that should keep him busy until late. Pack a bag with anything you cannot bear to leave behind and hide it. If things go bad, if you are in immediate danger, you run to the livery stable and we will get you out of town. Where would we go? Anywhere. Everywhere. Does it matter? Xander squeezed her hand. But I do not think it will come to that. I think if we are smart and careful, we can bring Philip down in a way that sticks. Clara nodded slowly, and Xander could see her drawing on reserves of courage she probably did not know she still had. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow when I come by, we're going to stage something. Philip has been telling everyone you are clumsy and accident-prone, so we are going to arrange for witnesses to see exactly how those accidents happen. Understanding dawned in Clara's eyes. You want him to hurt me in front of people. I know how that sounds, Xander said quickly, but I will be right there. I will not let him do any real damage, I swear. But if we can get him to reveal himself, to let his control slip for just a moment in front of witnesses who matter, we can shatter his lies. It was a dangerous plan, requiring perfect timing and relying on Philip's temper overcoming his caution, but Clara was nodding, determination settling over her features. All right, I trust you. Those 3 words carried more weight than any declaration Xander had ever heard. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I will not let you down. After Xander left, Clara stood in the barn for a long time, her fingers pressed to her lips where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss. She should feel guilty, she supposed. She was a married woman, and what she had just done was adultery in the eyes of God and the law. But she felt no guilt, only a fierce joy that burned away 2 years of accumulated darkness. For the first time since her wedding day, Clara could see a future that did not end in her death. She could imagine a life where she was not afraid, where she could laugh and speak her mind and simply exist without constantly calculating how to avoid the next blow. And in that imagined future, she could see Xander Voss with his steady gray eyes and gentle hands, looking at her like she was something miraculous. It was too soon to call it love, probably. They barely knew each other, but Clara thought it might be the beginning of love, the seed of something that could grow into something strong and real if given the chance. She wanted that chance, wanted it with a desperation that shocked her. But first, she had to survive tomorrow. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Philip was in one of his moods, the kind where everything Clara did was wrong. The breakfast eggs were too runny. She had starched his collar too stiff. The house was dusty despite her having cleaned it from top to bottom the day before. He did not hit her, not yet, but she could feel the violence simmering beneath his pleasant facade, waiting for an excuse to erupt. By late afternoon, Clara's nerves were stretched to breaking. She dropped a plate while washing dishes, and Philip's hand shot out to grip her wrist with bruising force. "Clumsy as always," he said softly, his breath hot against her ear. "I wonder sometimes if you do it deliberately just to vex me." "I am sorry," Clara whispered, the automatic apology falling from her lips even as rage burned in her chest. How many times had she apologized for things that were not her fault? How many times had she made herself small and meek to avoid his anger? Philip released her wrist with a dismissive sound. "Clean that up, and try not to break anything else. I have a council meeting this evening, and I do not need the aggravation of your incompetence before I leave." He left for his meeting at 6, and Clara allowed herself to breathe properly for the first time all day. She changed into a fresh dress, one of her older ones that Philip had complained made her look dowdy, and waited. Xander had said he would come, had promised he would be there, and Clara clung to that promise like a lifeline. He arrived just as the sun was setting, and seeing him stride up the front walk made Clara's heart leap. She met him at the door, and he gave her a searching look. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "No, I do not know anymore." Clara ushered him inside quickly. "Philip left 10 minutes ago. How's this going to work?" Xander had clearly been thinking the plan through because he explained it quickly and efficiently. "I invited Sheriff Daniels and Doc Morrison to stop by the livery this evening to look at a horse I am thinking of buying. But I am going to suggest we walk over here instead, on the pretext of asking your husband's advice about something. Philip should be at the meeting, but if we time it right, he will be on his way home just as we arrive." "And then what?" Clara asked, though she thought she already knew. "Then he's going to find his wife entertaining 3 men in his home while he was away, and he's going to lose his temper." Xander's expression was grim. "I am gambling that his need to punish you will overcome his usual caution if he thinks you have been inappropriate. He will want to put you in your place, and he will want to do it in front of other men to reassert his control." It was a sound theory. Clara knew her husband well enough to know that his need to dominate her was rooted in deep insecurity. The thought of her having any independence, any connection to others, especially men, would enrage him. "What if he kills me?" "He will not get the chance." Xander's hand cupped her cheek gently. "I will be right there. So will the sheriff and the doctor. The moment he lays a hand on you, we will have proof that his stories about your clumsiness are lies." Clara leaned into his touch, drawing strength from it. "I am terrified." "I know, but you are also brave, and after tonight, you will be free." They heard voices approaching, and Xander stepped back, putting proper distance between them. Clara smoothed her skirts with shaking hands and tried to look casual as Xander opened the door to admit Sheriff Daniels and Doc Morrison. Sheriff Daniels was a weathered man in his 50s who had known Philip for years. Doc Morrison was younger, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a thoughtful manner. Both looked slightly confused about why they were at the Vanderwick house instead of the livery. "Mrs. Vanderwick," Sheriff Daniels said, touching his hat, "apologies for the intrusion. Voss here said your husband wanted to discuss some business matter, but I see Mr. Vanderwick is not home." "He is at the council meeting," Clara said, her voice remarkably steady, "but he should return soon. Please, come in and wait. I can make coffee." It was perfectly innocent, perfectly proper. A wife offering hospitality to men waiting to speak with her husband. But Clara knew how Philip would see it, and her hands trembled as she poured coffee in the kitchen. Xander appeared in the doorway, blocking the view from the sitting room where the other men waited. "You are doing beautifully," he said quietly. "Just a few more minutes." Those few minutes felt like hours. Clara carried the coffee tray into the sitting room and played the gracious hostess while her heart hammered against her ribs. Sheriff Daniels and Doc Morrison made polite small talk about the weather and upcoming church social. Xander sat watchful and alert, his gray eyes tracking every sound from outside. And then they heard it. The sharp crack of the front gate, footsteps on the porch moving too fast to be casual. The door slammed open, and Philip Vanderwick stood in the entrance to the sitting room, his face flushed with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was dangerously quiet as his eyes swept over the scene. His wife, dressed in that dress he hated, entertaining 3 men in their home. "Clara, what are these men doing in my house?" Clara rose carefully, her coffee cup rattling in its saucer. "They came to speak with you about a business matter. I was simply offering them coffee while they waited." How thoughtful. Philip's tone could have cut glass. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Clara's arm, his fingers digging into the exact spots he had bruised that morning. She could not help the small cry of pain that escaped her. "Mr. Vanderwick," Sheriff Daniels said, rising from his seat, "there's no need for that. We were just leaving." But Philip was not listening. All his attention was focused on Clara, and she could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to decide how much he could get away with in front of witnesses. His pride won out over his caution. "You stupid, worthless woman," he hissed, shaking her hard enough to make her teeth rattle. "I leave you alone for 1 evening, and you invite men into our home like some common whore." "Philip, please," Clara gasped, genuinely frightened now. She had never seen him this angry, this openly violent. "They were just waiting for you." "Waiting for me? Or did you invite them here thinking you could humiliate me?" His other hand came up and Clara flinched, expecting the blow. It never landed. Xander was there, moving with startling speed to catch Philip's wrist. "Let her go." Philip turned his rage on Xander, but he was smart enough not to attack a man who clearly outmatched him physically. Instead, he played to his audience. "You see? This is exactly what I suspected. My wife has been carrying on with the stable hand behind my back. Clara, how could you betray me like this?" "I have done nothing wrong," Clara said, finding her voice, finding her strength. "But you have. You have hurt me every day for 2 years, and then you lied to everyone about it. Made them think I was clumsy, that I was the problem. But I am not the problem. You are." Philip's face went pale, then flushed dark red. "You are hysterical. Imagining things. Gentlemen, you see how she is. I've tried to help her, tried to protect her from herself, but she is clearly disturbed." "Is that why you have bruises shaped like handprints on your wife's arms?" Xander asked quietly, not releasing Philip's wrist. "Is that why she flinched when you raised your hand just now, like she's been hit many times before?" Doc Morrison stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Vanderwick, may I examine your arms?" Clara looked at the doctor, then at the sheriff, then at Philip's furious face. This was the moment, the choice. She could back down, could retreat into her cage and her lies, could survive another day in the hell her marriage had become. Or she could step forward into the unknown and hope that the truth would be enough. She pulled up her sleeves. The bruises were stark against her pale skin, purple and yellow fingerprints clear as day, in patterns that could only have come from someone gripping her hard enough to hurt. Doc Morrison's face went grim as he examined them, then gently moved her collar to reveal the fading marks on her throat. "These are not from falling or clumsiness," Doc Morrison said flatly. "These are from being grabbed and choked. Sheriff, I am willing to testify that Mrs. Vanderwick has been physically abused." Sheriff Daniels looked sick as he took in the evidence. "Mr. Vanderwick, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the jail while we sort this out." "This is ridiculous," Philip blustered, but there was fear creeping into his voice now. "She is my wife. What happens between us is private business." "Attempted murder is not private business," Xander said, still holding Philip's wrist in an iron grip. "Tell them about the carriage, Philip. Tell them how you cut the belly band so your wife would be thrown from a bolting carriage and killed." "I did no such thing," Philip said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I saw you do it," Xander said calmly. "I watched you inspect that carriage very carefully the morning you sabotaged it. I am willing to testify to that under oath." The trap was closing, and Philip knew it. He tried one last gambit, looking at Sheriff Daniels with wounded dignity. "Tom, you have known me for 10 years. Do you really believe I would harm my own wife? This man is clearly infatuated with Clara and trying to poison you against me. He has probably been the one hurting her, trying to turn her against me." It was a good try, but Sheriff Daniels was looking at Clara's bruises and remembering all the other accidents and injuries Philip had explained away over the years. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to hear Mrs. Vanderwick's side of things. Madam, has your husband been harming you?" This was it, the moment of truth. Clara met Philip's eyes and saw the threat there, the promise of retribution if she spoke against him. But she also saw Xander standing solid and protective, saw Doc Morrison's kind concern and Sheriff Daniels's troubled sympathy. She was not alone anymore. She had witnesses. She had help. She had Xander. "Yes," Clara said clearly. "My husband has been beating me since 3 months after our wedding. He's careful about it, always making it look like accidents, always having plausible explanations. But every bruise, every injury, every close call has been his doing. He's been trying to break me, and when that did not work fast enough, he tried to kill me with the carriage accident." Philip lunged for her with a roar of rage, but Xander and Sheriff Daniels both moved to restrain him. It took both men to wrestle Philip under control, and in his fury, he shouted things he never would have said if he had been thinking clearly. "You ungrateful bitch! I gave you everything. I made you respectable when you were just some spinster schoolteacher with no prospects. And this is how you repay me? By spreading lies and whoring around with stable hands? I should have killed you properly instead of hoping you were stupid enough to die by accident." The confession rang through the room like a gunshot. Sheriff Daniels' face hardened as he snapped handcuffs onto Philip's wrists. "Philip Vanderwick, I am arresting you for assault and attempted murder of your wife. You have the right to—" Whatever else the sheriff said was drowned out by Philip's screaming. He fought and cursed, all pretense of respectability abandoned, and Clara saw him clearly for the first time. He was just a small, cruel man who had built his self-worth on controlling and hurting someone weaker than himself. Without his victim to break, he was nothing. Doc Morrison escorted Clara to the kitchen while Sheriff Daniels dragged Philip out to the jail. Xander followed, watching as they disappeared down the street. When he returned, he found Clara sitting at her own kitchen table, shaking like a leaf. "It is over," she whispered. "It is really over." "Not quite yet," Xander said gently, pulling up a chair beside her. "There will be a trial. You will have to testify." "I can do that." Clara looked up at him with wonder in her eyes. "I thought I would die married to him, trapped forever. But you saved me. You actually saved me." Xander took her hand carefully, always careful with her now. "You saved yourself. I just made sure people were watching when you did." Doc Morrison cleared his throat from the doorway. "Mrs. Vanderwick, I should examine you properly, make sure there are no serious injuries that need tending, and I will need to document everything for the trial." The examination was thorough and humiliating, but Doc Morrison was kind and professional. He cataloged 2 years of abuse, the pattern of injuries that had been ignored or explained away. When it was done, he looked at Clara with deep regret. "I am sorry I did not see this sooner," he said quietly. "I treated you 3 times for various injuries, and I accepted your husband's explanations without question. That was wrong of me." "You had no reason to doubt him," Clara said, though the words stung. It was true. No one had looked closely enough to see the truth, because Philip had been so careful to seem respectable. After Doc Morrison left, Clara and Xander sat in the kitchen as night fell around them. Neither moved to light the lamps. The darkness felt safe somehow, private. "What happens now?" Clara asked finally. "I have nowhere to go. This house, everything in it, belongs to Philip. I have no money, no family, no way to support myself." "You will stay at the boarding house," Xander said firmly. "Mrs. Jameson is a good woman. She will take you in, and I will make sure you are safe until the trial is done." "And after the trial?" Xander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "After the trial, that's up to you. You will be free, Clara. Truly free. And you can do anything you want with that freedom, go anywhere, be anyone. You do not owe me anything." "What if what I want is to be with you?" The question hung in the air between them. Xander's hand tightened on hers. "Then I would count myself the luckiest man alive. But Clara, you need time. Time to heal. Time to figure out who you are when you are not afraid. I do not want you choosing me out of gratitude or because I'm the first person to show you kindness." Clara understood what he was saying, and part of her knew he was right. But part of her also knew that what she felt for Xander was not gratitude. It was recognition. It was the understanding that this man, with his steady presence and his unwavering sense of right and wrong, was someone she could build a real life with, someone who would never hurt her, who would never try to make himself feel bigger by making her feel small. "I will take the time," she promised. "But Xander, I want you to know that when I kissed you, it was not because you saved me. It was because when I look at you, I see someone worth loving, and I want the chance to do that properly, without fear or lies or desperation between us." Xander brought her hand to his lips, his eyes bright in the darkness. "Then when this is done, when you are healed and free and sure, you come find me, and we will start properly." It was a promise and a farewell all at once. Clara stayed at Mrs. Jameson's boarding house that night, and true to the landlady's reputation, she asked no questions and simply provided a clean room and a sympathetic ear. The news of Philip Vanderwick's arrest spread through Lordsburg like wildfire, and by morning the entire town was buzzing with shock and speculation. The trial was set for 3 weeks later, which gave Judge Taylor time to travel in from Santa Fe. Those 3 weeks were strange for Clara. She was free for the first time in 2 years, but freedom felt strange and frightening. She had to relearn how to walk through town without flinching, how to speak to people without calculating how her words might be used against her later, how to sleep without listening for Philip's footsteps. Xander was there, but he kept his promise to give her space. He did not court her or push for anything beyond friendship. Instead, he simply existed as a steady presence in her life. He walked with her when she was afraid to go out alone. He sat with her on Mrs. Jameson's porch in the evenings and told her stories about his years on the cattle trails. He made her laugh, something Clara had almost forgotten how to do. And slowly, carefully, Clara began to heal. She started teaching again, volunteering at the schoolhouse when the regular teacher needed help. She made friends with other women in town, rediscovering the social connections Philip had systematically destroyed. She began to remember who she had been before fear had reshaped her. The trial itself was brutal. Philip had hired an expensive lawyer from Santa Fe who tried every trick to discredit Clara's testimony. He painted her as an unfaithful wife, suggested she had injured herself to gain sympathy, implied that she and Xander had conspired to frame an innocent man. But Clara had Doc Morrison's medical testimony. She had Xander's account of the sabotaged carriage, and most damning of all, she had Philip's own rage-filled confession witnessed by both the sheriff and the doctor. Philip took the stand in his own defense and tried to play the wounded husband, but under cross-examination by the prosecutor, his temper got the better of him again. He made threats, revealed his contempt for his wife, showed the jury exactly what kind of man he was beneath his respectable surface. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Philip Vanderwick was found guilty of assault and attempted murder. Judge Taylor, who had listened to the entire trial with a grave expression, sentenced him to 20 years in the territorial prison. As Philip was led away in chains, he locked eyes with Clara one last time. "You have ruined me," he said flatly. "I hope you are satisfied." "I am free," Clara replied, "and that is all I ever wanted." After the trial, there was the complicated business of dissolving the marriage and sorting out the finances. Philip had tried to hide his assets, but the bank board had removed him as soon as he was arrested, and a proper audit revealed evidence of embezzlement. The money Philip had stolen was returned to the bank, but his legitimate assets, including the house, were awarded to Clara as restitution for her suffering. She sold the house immediately. She could not bear to live in it, could not walk through rooms where she had been hurt and terrorized. The money from the sale, combined with what Philip had been ordered to pay her from his remaining funds, gave Clara something she had never had before: financial independence. 4 months after Philip's conviction, Clara stood on the porch of the livery stable and watched Xander work with a young colt. He moved with easy confidence, his voice low and soothing as he gentled the nervous animal. Clara felt her heart swell with affection and something deeper. Love, she thought. This was what love looked like. Not control or possession, but partnership and respect. Xander looked up and saw her watching. His whole face lit up with a smile that made her breath catch. "Mrs. Vanderwick," he called, wiping his hands on his trousers as he crossed to meet her. "What brings you by?" "I wanted to talk to you about something." Clara was nervous, but it was a good kind of nervous. Anticipation rather than fear. "Do you have a few minutes?" They walked to a quiet spot by the creek that ran behind the stable. The late autumn sun was warm on Clara's face, and she could hear birds singing in the cottonwood trees. It was a beautiful day, perfect and peaceful. "I have been thinking," Clara began, then stopped and started again. "No, that is not right. Xander, I know what I want. I have spent these last months healing, remembering who I am, building a life that is truly mine. And now I am ready." "Ready for what?" Xander asked, though she could see hope and caution warring in his eyes. "Ready to start properly, like you said." Clara took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I love you, Xander Voss. Not because you saved me, though you did. Not because I am grateful, though I am. I love you because you are kind and stubborn and fiercely protective of people who need protecting. I love you because you make me laugh and you listen when I talk, and you have never once tried to make me into something I am not. I love you because when I imagine my future, you are in it." Xander's hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized she was crying. "I love you too. Have loved you from the moment you looked at me with those green eyes, and I saw how brave you were, how strong despite everything trying to break you. Clara, I would be honored to build a life with you." When he kissed her this time, it was different from that first desperate kiss in the barn. This was a kiss full of promise and joy, the kind of kiss that marked a beginning rather than an escape. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself fall into it, into him, into the future they could build together. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church. Clara wore a simple blue dress, not white, because she was not a first-time bride and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Xander wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. Mrs. Jameson cried happy tears, and Sheriff Daniels gave Clara away since she had no family of her own. The whole town turned out for the wedding, and if anyone thought it was scandalous how quickly Clara had remarried after her husband's imprisonment, they kept it to themselves. Most people were simply glad to see her happy, to see her walking without fear and laughing without constraint. Xander and Clara bought a small ranch outside of town with the money from the sale of the Vanderwick house. It was not fancy, just a simple cabin and some good grazing land, but it was theirs, built on love and honesty rather than lies and control. The first year of their marriage was not always easy. Clara had nightmares sometimes, would wake up terrified and disoriented, expecting Philip's anger. But Xander was always there, patient and understanding, holding her until the fear passed and reality reasserted itself. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent. Slowly, Clara learned that marriage could be a partnership rather than a prison. They worked the ranch together, building their herd and making improvements to the property. Clara discovered she had a talent for raising horses, and several of her colts sold for good prices at auction. Xander hired on with local ranchers for cattle drives in the spring, always returning home to Clara with stories and wages that they saved for the future. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, and Clara would marvel at how different her life had become. She had freedom. She had love. She had a husband who valued her opinions and never raised his voice in anger, who would rather walk away from an argument than say something hurtful. 18 months after their wedding, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had thought about children before, but the idea of bringing a baby into the hell her first marriage had been was unthinkable. Now, with Xander, it felt like the natural next step. "Are you happy?" she asked Xander when she told him the news, suddenly needing reassurance. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xander said, pulling her into his arms and burying his face in her hair. "Clara, we are going to have a family, a real family built on love and safety. Our child will never know fear the way you did. I swear it." Their son was born in the spring of 1880, screaming his way into the world with impressive lungs and a full head of dark hair. They named him James, after Xander's father who had died when Xander was young, and from the moment Clara held her son, she knew that she would do anything to protect him. Xander was a devoted father, patient with James's infant crying and endlessly entertained by his every milestone. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved toys from wood, and sang lullabies in a surprisingly good voice. Watching him with their son, Clara felt her heart expand with so much love she thought she might burst from it. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Rose, and their family felt complete. James was a serious child, thoughtful and careful, while Rose was wild and fearless, climbing everything and afraid of nothing. They were perfect, and Clara loved them with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, and Xander and Clara became well-respected members of the Lordsburg community. Clara taught Sunday school at the church, and Xander served on the town council. They had friends, neighbors who helped during hard times and celebrated during good ones. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Clara would lie in bed next to Xander and think about how close she had come to never having this life. If Xander had not noticed the sabotaged carriage, if he had not been brave enough to challenge Philip's lies, if she had not found the courage to speak her truth, she would be dead or still trapped in that nightmare marriage. "What are you thinking about?" Xander would ask, always attuned to her moods. "How lucky I am," Clara would answer. "How much I love you. How grateful I am that you were stubborn enough to fight for me when I could not fight for myself." "You fought too," Xander would remind her, pulling her close. "You were the brave one. I just made sure people were paying attention." It became their refrain, their way of acknowledging what they had both done to reach this place. Clara had survived and found her voice. Xander had refused to look away from suffering and had risked himself to help a stranger. Together, they had built something beautiful from the ruins of Clara's first marriage. 5 years after Philip's conviction, word reached Lordsburg that he had died in prison, killed in a fight with another inmate. Clara felt nothing when she heard the news. No grief, no relief, just a sense of finality. That chapter of her life was closed completely now. "Are you all right?" Xander asked when she told him. "I am," Clara said, and realized it was true. "He cannot hurt me anymore. He never could again, really, not after the truth came out. But now it truly is over." They held a small private ceremony, just the two of them, where Clara spoke words of release and forgiveness. Not forgiveness for Philip, who had never shown remorse, but forgiveness for herself. For the girl who had believed a charming lie, for the woman who had stayed too long and hoped things would change, for every moment she had felt weak or foolish. "I forgive myself for not knowing better," Clara said quietly, standing by the creek where Xander had first told her he loved her. "And I thank myself for surviving, for being strong enough to accept help when it was offered, for finding the courage to speak the truth even when it was terrifying." Xander held her while she cried, not from grief, but from release. When the tears passed, Clara felt lighter than she had in years. The last shadow had lifted, and she was truly, completely free. The years continued to roll forward, bringing their joys and sorrows like all lives do. They lost a crop 1 year to drought, but the community rallied to help them through. James grew into a quiet, studious boy who wanted to be a lawyer, while Rose declared her intention to be a rancher like her father. Clara taught at the Lordsburg school again, this time as the head teacher, and found deep satisfaction in educating the next generation. Xander remained the steady center of their family, strong and reliable, the kind of man who kept his word and lived according to his principles. He never raised his hand in anger, never spoke words meant to wound, never made Clara feel like she was anything less than his treasured partner. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Clara and Xander took a rare day away from the ranch and the children, who were being watched by Mrs. Jameson. They rode out to a beautiful spot in the mountains where wildflowers grew thick in the meadows and the air was clear and sweet. "I never thought I could be this happy," Clara said, lying in the grass with her head on Xander's chest. 10 years ago, I was trapped in hell. Now I have everything I ever dreamed of and more." "We built a good life," Xander agreed, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "You, me, and the kids, the ranch, our friends, all of it." "I love you," Clara said, the words as natural as breathing now. She said them often, as did Xander, because they both understood that love was not something to be hoarded or assumed, but something to be expressed and celebrated. "I love you too," Xander replied. "Every day, every moment, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They made love there in the meadow, under the wide blue sky, and it was tender and passionate and full of a decade's worth of trust and intimacy. Afterward, they lay tangled together, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant call of birds. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not checked that carriage?" Xander asked quietly. "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. You did check the carriage. You did help me. And everything that came after was a choice we both made. to trust each other, to build something real, to love without fear. "No regrets?" Xander asked. "None," Clara said firmly. "Everything I went through, as terrible as it was, led me here, to you, to this life. I would not change it, because changing it might mean losing what we have." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, then rode home to their children and their ranch and the life they had built together. It was not a perfect life, because no life is perfect, but it was good. It was filled with love and laughter, with honest work and genuine companionship. James did indeed become a lawyer, studying in Santa Fe and then returning to Lordsburg to practice. He married a teacher named Sarah and gave Clara and Xander 3 grandchildren who brought new joy into their lives. Rose took over the ranch eventually, marrying a cowboy named Tom who had worked for Xander for years. She ran the operation with skill and determination, expanding their holdings and earning respect throughout the territory. As Clara and Xander grew older, they would sit on that same porch where they had courted and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Clara's hair went silver, and Xander's back ached from years of hard work, but they still held hands and still looked at each other with the same love that had bloomed in the midst of danger and lies all those years ago. "We did good," Xander would say, watching their family gathered for Sunday dinner. "We did," Clara would agree. "We built something that will last long after we are gone, love and truth and family. That is a legacy to be proud of." On a warm summer evening in 1905, Clara Voss passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 71, surrounded by her family. She had lived a full, rich life, and she left the world knowing she was deeply loved. Xander held her hand as she slipped away, whispering his love and gratitude for the 27 years they had shared. He followed her 6 months later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he sat in his favorite chair on the porch. Their children found him there, a letter to Clara clutched in his hand, expressing all the love and devotion he had carried for her even into death. They were buried side by side in the Lordsburg cemetery, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. But their true legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the stories told about the cowboy who had exposed a liar and saved a woman from death, in the love that had grown from tragedy into something beautiful and lasting. The ranch remained in the family for generations, and the story of Clara and Xander became a local legend. How a woman trapped in an abusive marriage had found the courage to speak her truth, how a drifting cowboy had stopped running long enough to fight for someone who needed a champion, how together they had built a love that weathered every storm and emerged stronger. In Lordsburg, people still talked about them decades later, about the banker who had lied to the whole town and the cowboy who had made sure everyone knew the truth, about the woman who had survived and the man who had loved her, about how sometimes, even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, justice could prevail and love could triumph over cruelty. Their story became a reminder that speaking the truth mattered, that standing up against injustice made a difference, that one person willing to look beyond comfortable lies could change everything. It became a story about courage in all its forms, about the bravery required to survive impossible circumstances and the bravery required to help someone in need even when it was dangerous and difficult. Most of all, it became a story about love. Real love, the kind that did not control or diminish but supported and celebrated. The kind of love that Clara and Xander had found together, forged in fire and tempered by time into something unbreakable. The kind of love that changed lives and echoed through generations, a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other freely, honestly, and completely. And in the end, that was the truth that mattered most. Not the lies Philip Vanderwick had told, not the violence and manipulation that had nearly destroyed Clara, but the love that had saved her and the life she and Xander had built together. That was the truth that endured, that inspired, that made their story worth telling and remembering long after they were gone. The cowboy had discovered that her husband lied to the whole town. He had made sure everyone knew the truth, but more importantly, he had shown Clara that she deserved better, that there was another way to live, that love did not have to hurt. And together, They had created something beautiful from the ashes of those lies, something that lasted far beyond their own lives and touched everyone who heard their story. That was the real truth. That was the legacy they left behind, and it was more powerful than any lie could ever be.